Welcome to Calling All Voices, brought to you by the Dementia Action Alliance and the Global Council on Alzheimer's Disease. My name is Karen Love, and I am the CEO of the Dementia Action Alliance. In this podcast, you will hear from people living with dementia from the Black and the LGBTQ+ communities. They'll share stories about how resilience and persistence can help people to continue to live meaningful lives, even with the diagnosis of dementia. And you'll hear participants discuss why it's important that we call all voices to share their experiences.
The podcast is called Calling All Voices. This is a really, really cool one because this particular episode definitely speaks my language. This one is all about the importance of art and creativity and self-expression and how important that is while living with dementia. Our guest today literally found her voice. She learned how to speak again through art, even though aphasia, which is a symptom of dementia, even though aphasia was quite literally robbing her of her ability to verbally communicate. She used art to kind of turn that around. She is an artist, a ceramics coach, and a fellow lesbian living in New Mexico. Hello and welcome, my friend, Susan Balkman.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Nice to see you. Susan, I'm so happy that you're back here because, gosh, the first time we talked, I was just so pumped up. Being creative is like, I have to be creative. It's so important. And I really want to dive so much into that, but I got to start a half a step back to kind of the beginning. Tell us a little bit about how your journey with dementia began. When did you realize and how did you realize that something had changed with you?
Let's see. Well, aside from being an artist, I was also a therapist, so for quite some time. And how I started not to be able to speak really well. This is how I figured out that something was wrong. I would drive in my driveway and start undressing in the driveway, not having a clue what I was doing. And then, you know how that happens, and then you click in again and then you go out about your business. Or I was driving and I had no clue where I was. I had to call somebody to help me get someplace that I was going, until Yuta told me how to use the iPhone to figure out where I was going. And so yeah, when I started to have symptoms, I was seeing a therapist. I was seeing a neurologist at the time. And so she started to test me because she was noticing things not being quite right. She knew me. And so she started to test me, and I was failing miserably on the tests. And she had known me for some time, so I would say, a couple months into the testing, she sat me down and she said, I think this is what's going on with you. You have early stage dementia. And this is what's going to happen in the future. And you have aphasia. I wasn't able to talk. I wasn't talking. I stopped talking because I couldn't figure out how to say the words I needed to say. And then she sent me to somebody else who was a friend I knew, and we started working, and he works very differently, non-verbally, and then I finally got to the place of going to my a neurologist, and she just gave me the tests, and then that's what basically happened is that she ran the tests, and there it was. And I already knew, unfortunately, when you're in the field, you kind of know. And
you had a kind of a sense of, okay, something's going on here, and I know enough as a therapist, this is not right.
right.
Yeah. And aphasia, for people who might not be familiar with it, you had explained it to me one time, I thought so well, that aphasia is basically, you know what's in your head and you want to say it, but it's not able to go from here to here in the order that you would like it to be received, right?
That's right.
And so that was kind of the beginning for you. It was like, wait a minute. And I can imagine, I guess, as a therapist, that probably affected how you were conducting your sessions with clients and that sort of thing.
It did. And that's why I think I told you this before, but I'll share it again, because it was fairly profound for me at the time. Is that when I was sitting across from one of my clients, and I was, she said a word that's like a common word, like can or dog or something. I don't remember what it was, but it's very common. And I spent the whole session trying to figure out what the word was. So at that point, I knew I was in trouble, because I wasn't able to, all I wanted to do was get up and look it up. That's all I could think about, was get up and look it up. Well, that's when I decided that was the time that I needed to stop working with people, because
as a therapist,
this
that's hard
wasn't
to
going to serve anybody very well. And it was an eye-opener, honestly. And just kind of even though you have you have somebody telling you this is what's going on with you. And I was very, very conscious about asking, is it time for me to stop working, And I don't know who it was, maybe somebody said, you'll know when it's time. And that was exactly what happened. And I'm actually very grateful it happened, because I would have never poured myself into creativity the way I poured myself into creativity.
Yeah. So. I love that, there's so many different stories. I love to hear, the arc, where did you go from here to there, and what's the path that we're on. And your story is so interesting in that, as you just said, without getting this diagnosis, right, you would never know where that was going to take you next. You would never have gotten here. So when you were diagnosed with mild to moderate cognitive impairment, right? Mm-hmm. What advice did you get when you were diagnosed? What was said to you? Do you recall?
Oh, God. Well, by when it was Michelle, she was very straightforward and told me, exactly what was going to probably happen. And then we went to the Cleveland Clinic. No, then I went to this other therapist, this other guy who did the testing, the full testing. And then he said, well, what's important is that you focus on your quality of life, which is very upset to have to tell me. I was very professional. It's like, I think he was more traumatized than I was at the time. Like, okay, I've got this, guys, just what do I do next? Yeah. And then I went to the Cleveland Clinic, and that was a bit of a challenge.
And then you went to someone who gave you this piece of advice that then pointed you down the path of using your creativity. Mm-hmm. And that was Dr.
Ludwig.
Yvette Ludwig. I'm so
sorry.
Uta
Ludwig.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna, all right, I'll try that again in a little bit. But yeah, she gave you some great advice, which was what was that she said to you?
Go and be creative. She asked me what I love to do. Mm-hmm. What do I love to do? And I love to do clay. I love to be creative. And she said, well, that's what you need to go do. Go do clay.
Had you done clay before in your life?
I hadn't done clay. When did I do clay? I did clay when I was in high school. And then I think I can't remember when I started doing clay again. And then when she said that to me, that was it. And I literally, what I did was, you know, I was used to getting up and going to work and then coming home.
Mm-hmm.
So like everybody else. And so I went to the clay shop. There was a place called Santa Fe Clay. And I went in there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I left at 5 o'clock. And then progressively, as time went by, I left at 7 o'clock. You know, it was, you know, I got into what I was doing. And actually, that's what helped me gain my voice again. Because I think I've shared this the last time, was that they did outdoor sales, and they had the Christmas sales and things like that. And so in order to do sales, you have to talk to people. You can't try, when you're selling something to somebody, they ask a zillion questions about what they're doing. So I used to hand them my pot, because that tactile experience is really important. And then let them, you know, experience the pot. And then I would explain, when they asked me questions, I would explain how I made the pots. And because I have a texture that's at that time was fairly unique. Now, because a lot of people have seen it, they're starting to do it. So I had to communicate. Plus I had to communicate because I had to tell them how much I was going to charge them. And, you know, so you just start talking to people, and they start talking about their lives and who they are and all that stuff. And how
did that work, Susan? If you had aphasia, which again was making it difficult to go from here to here. If I were someone who came up and said, oh, you know, what are you making there? That's an interesting thing that you're working with clay. How were you able to communicate if you were experiencing aphasia?
Well, I had a handy little thing called the iPhone.
Okay.
And so what I would do, I'd do it right in front of people. I would look the words up. And then I would be able to tell them what I needed to tell them. And and fortunately, people were not, they didn't rush me. And my suspicions are, I could be wrong, but my suspicions are that it was obvious that I had a little difficulty communicating. I could be wrong, but you know, at the beginning. And so I just got my iPhone, and I'd look things up, and I'd show them on the phone how much stuff was going to cost. And then I would look other stuff up, and then I would talk with them. And then I finally got a routine, basically, of how I explained how I made my pots. And I invited them into the studio, and then I would have them watch other people, and then they could see, you know, they could see the progress. And then they also then got invited in and possibly signed up for a class. But I just use the iPhone a lot. I mean, you know, I can't calculate numbers in my head. That's won't happen. So I just used, since I had to, you know, do that, because you have to do gross receipts tax in New Mexico. And so I had to make sure I knew what the tax was going to be. And, you know, unfortunately or unfortunately, I'm the kind of person, like, some kid would come up, this is a true story. Some kid would come up, little kids, you know, 6, 7, 8, all the way down, would come up and pick up a pot, and they would like it, and I just give it to them. So like, what was more important for me? Was it more important to make money, or was it more important to bring joy or have joy? And it was definitely more important for her to have joy and to be able to learn how to talk again.
Yeah.
And those two things were really, really important.
Yeah.
And if I could do that, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, why not?
Yeah. I you've said a lot of great things in here too. And I think what keeps kind of popping out for me is that here's something that this doctor encouraged you to be creative, do something that you enjoy creatively. You said, well, I'd like to try clay again. All right. You weren't able to communicate verbally, but you could show by using the phone, or perhaps, you know, pointing to a pot. Here you go. Do you like this? And showing, you were using, you know, your physical body to help to communicate when your verbal body could not. And
Right.
I think that's really a great point.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, because, you know, with communication, you know, they say show, don't tell, which is hard to do on a podcast, but we're videotaping it, so that works. But so much of what is received when you communicate is through our bodies. It's like over 50% is how we show through our bodies. And so I think that's interesting that you said that it kind of helped you. Another thing that you mentioned was the tactileness of clay. Could talk a little bit about that. How did that help you that particular art medium, the clay? How did that help you with your dementia?
Okay. So first of all, I just want to talk about clay, the clay itself.
Sure.
Clay has a lot of different bodies. It's got some clays are very soft. Some clays are more stoneware, and they have a more grainy texture. When you throw them on the ground, when you throw them on the table, they make sound. When you roll them out, they have a different voice. You know, when you're on the wheel and you're throwing a pot, it can take any form the pot wants to take, depending upon what you do with it. And it has its own life. So if you do something, it may do something else. So one of the other things that I learned as I'm thinking about this was flexibility, because for me, having aphasia and having this type of issue where sometimes it's really hard for me to communicate what I'm trying to say to somebody, there has to be a level of flexibility to what I'm doing to be able to do that. And somebody who's receiving what I'm saying has to be flexible in the willingness to hear what they're asking, but not getting like, oh, I do X, Y, Z. And I could write it out on a piece of paper and hand it to them, for heaven's sakes. For me to learn how to speak again, handing them a piece of paper was not going to be advantageous to me, because I would not be speaking. I absolutely, without hesitation, had to learn how to speak. And so for me, that's what clay does. It has a voice, and it has so many ways of describing what it's doing, even in a firing. So you can have a stoneware or a porcelain, which I use a lot, depending upon what color you want it to come out, how you want it to come out, and the texture you want on it. There are things that you have to be able to do to it and talk to it in a sense, so that it will do what you're asking it to do. Like when I stretch a pot out, I put something called sodium silicon on it. And I also put other clay bodies on clay bodies, which everybody goes like, how's that going to happen? What are you going to do? La, la, la. You know, the reality is all you do is slap the stuff on it. And when you stretch it out, it creates its own voice. And that's what I was doing, actually, with being able to talk again. I had to create, in a sense, a new voice, a new way of being able to describe what I'm doing or talk to anybody, and not just depend on the iPhone for the whole thing, because that doesn't sell pots, first of all.
Right. Not nearly as interesting looking. I would
Just
think.
like, one thing about clay that's most really important, kind of like having acrylics. When you do acrylics, which I've done, when you do acrylics you could use so many different ways, because it's a thicker thing, so you can really throw it on the canvas and let it land. You can you can do a whole bunch of things with it with a lot of color. Well, that's kind of what you're doing with clay. You've got a lot of textures and you're playing with them, and there's a lot of what are those things called? Glazes and other clays that you can mix together. Of course, you blow your pot up doing that too, but nevertheless, that create a voice that you wouldn't have known about. So that's what, for me, the clay allowed me to do, was to create the voice that I lost, to be able to force myself to do it. And through selling my work, I was forced to talk. And that was just, and find new avenues of how to explain what I was doing. And I think I said in the last one that when people come in to see, they walk through the studio and they watch what you're doing, they ask you what you're doing. Like I'm not a hand builder. I get bored with hand building. So it's like, I like that wheel. And when they asked me what it was, I couldn't tell them at the time. I couldn't remember how to say what the word was. I'd point to it, but I couldn't say it. And the thing that I said last time, and I think is so invaluable in terms of the studio I was in, it was invaluable. The people who were there were so kind and so engaged that they started to help me. They would say the word wheel, and then I would ask them to repeat it and ask them to spell it. And then I would say it. And I'd say it a couple times, or whatever it was that I was doing. And I can't always ask questions. And they were just incredible. They were just incredible. And so, it's just kind of a gift. And I don't know that everybody has the opportunity or are in places where they can do it, but I'm sure they can find them. They just have to allow themselves to get out of themselves and get out of whatever fear or whatever, what's the word? Limitations they put on themselves through their head. I can't do this anymore. Well, you can do this anymore.
Right.
You just got to do it. You just have to get up and do it. And there are ways to do those things.
I think what you're saying too is, I think, and I've heard a similar things from other people's stories who are living with dementia, is that you have to make the decision that, okay, you accept I have dementia.
Yeah.
And this is the thing I want to do.
Right.
And it may take a while. It's certainly going to be perhaps a little bit longer in doing whatever the task is at hand.
Right.
And you might have to do it differently than how you did it before. But as you just said, it can be done. You can do it. And I think being willing to, as you said, it could be easy I'm just going to write it down. Yeah. But finding other ways to find your voice through the clay and having the ability to point to things and have other people to help you to find your voice again. Right. That was huge. When Dr. Lockvig,
okay,
thank you. When she said, what do you love to do? Like, how can you be creative? What did you think about that? What was your response to that? Well, that's a weird question. What do I do with that? How did she encourage you to continue with that with that particular pursuit?
Well, at the time I was so traumatized, actually.
Mhm.
Here we were in a restaurant and I was blubbering my eyes out because I thought what am I going to do here? I can't, I just, I thought to myself, and Jutta, let me just say this. Jutta's a very strong Danish woman. And I don't think there's anything, if you told her you can't do it, that she wouldn't say, oh, yes, you can. And let me show you, you can. So I think a lot had to do with how she presented it and to say, I want you to go do it.
Mm.
Go out and do it.
Mm.
Don't just talk to me about it.
Yeah.
Go out and do it.
And you
And,
did.
and the other part, which I did with clients, but it's an important thing. It's that follow-up and say, I want you to let me know when you've done it.
Yeah.
So it's like life doesn't stop because you have dementia.
Yeah.
I believe it just starts. So
Oh, that's a great soundbite. I hope you guys get that. That's a great soundbite right there. You talked a little bit about, art and being creative, especially with the medium of clay and all that, it has helped you to overcome and better manage aphasia, right? That's helped you to better communicate. You've relearned the skill of communicating that way, and you've certainly just talked about the empowerment that goes with, relearning the skill of using clay and being creative and seeing how the clay communicates with you, and how that can be very empowering to figure out how to do stuff, even though you have dementia, and it's different. It's empowering to be able to figure out how to do it. In what ways has art helped you to be a little bit more vulnerable?
wow.
Because I think people have
Good
I
question.
think one of the biggest challenges, it seems, with a lot of people is, oh, I don't want to tell people that I have dementia. That's too vulnerable. I don't want to admit that.
Well, this is one of the things that happened when I first got diagnosed and I started doing clay was that what I said before was that I couldn't talk very well. But one thing that happened while that was going on was that I started to tell people that I had dementia, because I have aphasia and early stage dementia, because I couldn't communicate effectively. I was forced to do that. I forced myself to do that. Nobody forced me to do that. I forced myself to do that.
Mm.
And I don't know if I'm answering your question or not. So
You're doing great so far.
and I learned through the clay to be flexible.
Right.
It's like, so I have this thing that developed more this year. Runs in my family. So, right?
Uh-huh.
72 years old. Did I think I was going to get this now? No, but I did. So somebody says, I'm going to say it this way because I just kind of thought about this, but this is what clay is like. Did I know I was going to get this? No. Did I know my clay I was going to get a little dent in it in this spot? Can I do something about this? Yes, I can do something about this. I can get a facelift. Do I want to get a facelift? No. Not for anybody's money. But it's that process of having choice, being able to be flexible, being able to feel the texture of what I'm working with, who I'm with. It never means that I don't get angry. It doesn't mean that I don't cry. It doesn't mean that I don't have tantrums. It doesn't mean that when I'm talking to somebody and I can't remember what I'm talking about, which happens often, that I stop talking. I just say, could you please tell me what I was talking about?
Yeah.
You know, could you just tell me what I just said?
What do you
You
want
know,
others? What do you want others to know? What do you want others who are living with dementia to know about maintaining that flexibility, that creativity? Why is that important to maintain that throughout their journey with dementia?
It's essential, because if you don't do it, you're going to stop doing it completely. And it's that, to me, is for me, I can't speak for anybody else. If you don't stop using a skill, if you stop using the skills that you actually have, you're going to lose them completely, to the point where you won't start talking, to the point where your brain's not going to move, to the point you're not going to get off the couch, to all the things that you loved in your life are going to start falling away. Because people are not going to be wanting to be around you if you're not somehow going to engage and act as if something's wrong. So it's kind of, I'm going to probably repeat myself when I say this, because I think it's important. There are people who live in their lives in beds. They have to depend on other people to move around. Now, they could choose to stay in that bed and die in that bed and not do anything. I could choose to stop talking and never talk about my dementia. And my brain would stop working. My mouth would stop working. My voice might stop working. Who knows what I would do? Maybe I'd be grunting. I don't know. But I don't believe that that's what my life's about. And nor do I believe that that's what anybody's life is about. And I know enough people in the dementia, people I know who have dementia, who are brilliant people and share who they are every single solitary day and keep moving. They do it all the time. They're the ones who inspired me to not shut down completely. The people who are at the dementia and the Alzheimer's cafes, oh my God.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. The Alzheimer's cafes, for people who don't know what that is, would you just explain what is an Alzheimer's cafe?
An Alzheimer's cafe is for people who have been diagnosed with some form of dementia. Come to a cafe where there is, I don't know what other people do. Some people, well, the way we do it, and you just set it up, the way it's set up is for arts and singing and keeping people engaged. And sometimes people just sit there and stare at each other because they can't talk. And then other people go and take people on field trips, which, you know, I don't want to say anything negative about it, but I think people need to stay engaged somehow. Yeah. And that the art thing keeps people engaged.
Yeah, I think there's a difference, you know, as a performer, there is a difference between being on stage and performing to an audience, right? There's this kind of disconnect there. Whereas if you are actively engaged in, you know, connecting with that audience and somehow and using and in your case with doing clay, you are engaging with the clay, you know, having this ability to create something and being connected to it is huge.
And you know, this is what's important about creativity. When you're saying, I'm just remembering this, So I think I've shared this last time, but I'll do it again too. When we do the Alzheimer's cafes, the thing that's the most spectacular, the thing that's the most, what's the right word? I can't think of the word, ahas, I don't know what I'm gonna call it. That regardless of whether you have a voice, people can usually do creative things.
Mhm.
They're scared of it at the beginning, and then they finally eventually get into it. If you watch and you watch people around the room, they'll communicate with their eyes. They don't have to say a word. And then they'll start to decide, she lays out all this stuff, what they want to do, because they're watching other people do it.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden they start becoming alive. It's like they're like outside of their diagnosis,
Mhm.
and they're living.
I think finding out what it is, who the person is, and knowing yourself, you got to ask that question. What is it that you enjoy creatively? You, Susan
Mhm.
Balkman, and you thinking, gosh, well, I used to do clay. And then drawing on that interest that you had at one point and really diving into that. That is the connection that made the difference for you. And everybody's different. And then
Right.
obviously, it gets a little bit more challenging when you're in situations with a lot of people in an activity room. But the way to look at it is very much the same, looking at who is this person and how can I connect with them using a particular medium.
Yes.
So just real quick, if anybody would like to check out your creative endeavors, see your pots or anything like that, is there any way for them to do that and maybe make a purchase as well?
Wow. I don't know if my website's still up.
Okay.
I probably have to go and get it going again.
All right. Well, we'll put in a way in the show notes for the podcast how people can get to see your art, because you are an amazing artist, and I wish I had something to say, hey, look at this. I don't have one. Thank you so much for your time today, Susan.
Hey, you're welcome.
Very much appreciate.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Calling All Voices. If you're interested in learning more, please see the episode notes for this podcast. In the episode notes, you can find more information about Calling All Voices and the work of the Dementia Action Alliance and the Global Council on Alzheimer's Disease. The creation of this podcast was sponsored by Otsuka America Pharmaceutical, Inc. The views expressed in this podcast reflect the views of the speakers, not the views of Otsuka America Pharmaceutical, Inc. If you liked what you heard today, please make sure to subscribe to the series, share a review, and let others know about it.